Prynhawn da, a chroeso I drydydd Darlith Goffa Gwyn Alf, dan nawdd Cymru Merthyr Tudfyl. So good afternoon and welcome to the third Cymru Merthyr Tudfyl Gwyn Alf Memorial Lecture. Now just a quick word first of all about the order of events this afternoon. I'll very shortly be introducing our guest speaker who will be giving this year's Gwyn Alf lecture, of course, and that'll be followed by a Q&A session hosted by Yes Cymru CEO Gwyn Alf. Nawr, wrth feddwl am beth I ddweud, bues i'n ystyried geiriau cyflwynydd yn haraith Gwyn Alf gyntaf, fel mae'n digwydd. In reflecting on what to say to introduce this year's lecture, I looked no further than the inspirational words of Ed Butler, who delivered our very first Gwyn Alf lecture, of course, as he stood on the balcony of Red House and addressed the crowd on Penderyn Square at the Independence March in 2019. Ed said, "There's far more that binds us together than keeps us apart." Now, in these so often dark days of dogged division, that really is a supersonic siren of sanity, is it not? And maybe, in claiming we dream the same dream, we want the same thing, Belinda Carlisle may have tapped into a similar vein of common sense. Who knows? So, armed with Ed's epic sentiment, we took aim and we cast our recruitment net a little wider than usual this year, suspecting and hoping that when we reeled in our catch, it would yield more than just a Gwyn Alf lecture giver. It's brought you. And a very fishy looking lot you are too. I joke, obviously. Now, I don't personally know the incumbent MP, but I feel I've seen and heard enough to get a taste of his politics. And in freezing out this year's Gwyn Alf lecture speaker for the brand new Merthyr Tudfyl and Upper Cynon constituency, it seems as though the powers that be, having glanced at the menu, decided that not only did we really like boiled cabbage, but that we liked it so much that we didn't even want to try anything else, ever. But if they thought they could silence a different voice, they were wrong. And today's turnout is proof positive of an audience ready to listen. So just to reassure you, Beth, if you've prepared two different lectures, one that's safe and keeps your granny happy, and another then, in true Gwyn Alf style, that fires the soul with passion and a belief that a fundamentally different future is not only possible, but ours. Can I suggest you forget the former and let's have the latter? Diolch yn fawr, o'n I ddim yn disgwyl hwnna. But as more and more people are starting to question the inadequacies and injustices of the status quo, tipping points are occurring in hearts and minds all over Wales, with what has to be the ultimate penny-dropping realisation that if we're truly better together, why, after so many centuries, aren't we better already? Barod? Boneddigion a boneddigesau I gyflwyno Darlith Gwyn Alf 2023. Please give a very warm welcome, Beth Winter.
No pressure then. No pressure. Wel, sut ydw i'n mynd I ddechrau? I'n mynd I ddechrau trwy ddweud diolch yn fawr am y gwahoddiad heddiw. Mae fe wir yn anrhydedd mawr I i wneud araith Gwyn Alf heddiw. Just to begin by thanking you for this very kind invitation. It really is a pleasure to be invited to give the Gwyn Alf lecture. My name is Beth Winter and I'm currently the Member of Parliament for Cynon Valley and have been since 2019. And I shall begin the lecture. And I look forward very much to question, answers and hopefully a bit of a debate and discussion because I'm always up for a good debate at the end. So I also want to thank Yes Cymru. I think it's quite a bold but a much needed request for somebody outside maybe of the traditional Yes Cymru grouping for the invitation to speak today. And to have the opportunity to speak at Gwyn Alf Williams' annual lecture here in what was his hometown of Merthyr Tudfyl is, like I said, very much an honour. And I do hope to do him and my subject matter justice this afternoon. And I also want to make reference to how timely I think this discussion is. The Constitutional Commission for Wales was actually over in Aberdeen this week. And last week we also saw Welsh Government publish its Senedd Cymru Members and Elections Bill. So I think this event is very timely. And while I understand that the primary focus of Yes Cymru is of achieving an independent Wales, and I recognise the growing strength of feeling to support that, I also want to take this opportunity this afternoon to share with you my view broadly on how we journey through our history, what I feel we can learn from our history, what challenges and opportunities we face today, and what priorities are important to me in the present political and economic situation. And crucially, and I know we'll all agree on this, how we establish and maintain a vision of the kind of society that we want for our country, Cymru, Wales. So for me, this does require an exploration of the importance of and interlinkages between state, the constitution and class-based politics, as well as the climate crisis, all of which lie within the province of understanding and embracing diversity. Identity, culture and place are central to this exploration. And we need, in my view, to follow this process in order to understand the neoliberal system which currently exists at a UK level, to challenge it and ultimately change it and move towards what I am committed to, which is a socialist society. And my starting point always is, what kind of society do we want? I am first and foremost a socialist, a very proud one, and I'm sure that'll not come as a surprise to those of you who already know me. And it is my commitment, my lifelong commitment, to fight for transformational, systemic societal change that underpins and informs my political outlook, action and vision. And it is and must be about the battle to create a fairer, more just, more equal and greener socialist society based on equality, dignity and social justice, and a society that puts people before profit, for the many, not the few. Here in Wales, but also on an international basis, because I am an internationalist, as I know most, if not all of you within this room will be. So to quote Marx, and you'll be very familiar with this quote, philosophers have hitherto only interpreted the world in various ways. The point, however, is to change it. Now, I have been on one heck of a journey in the past few years, with many lows, but thankfully a few highs. And I do continue to learn and develop my ideas and thoughts. My mind is never closed to new ideas and thoughts, but I think I share many of my ideas with political and social thinkers who have gone before us. Gwyn Alf himself, to whom this lecture event is dedicated, was on a political journey through most of his adult life. And like him, I believe we need to take one step back in our history so that we can take 2 steps forward, one to our present day and then one onto our future. So here in South Wales, we really do have a very strong and proud history of being at the forefront of change and of working class struggle. And the journey begins for me with the raising of that red flag on Heriau Common above the communities of Cynon Valley, to it then becoming a very potent symbol and part of the struggle for workers' rights and equality in the Merthyr Rising back in 1831. And as Gwyn Alf himself said, and I quote, "From that point, it was a militant working class consciousness which governed popular life in South Wales." And our valleys truly were a hotbed of activity, both economically, politically and culturally. The ironworks and the coal industries thrived, becoming at one point the most productive in the entire world. And that resulted, as we know, in population explosion, with people migrating to our valleys from, worldwide really. And this period also saw community and cultural changes with the flourishing of chapels, working men's clubs, libraries, music, literature and our iaith, our language. There was a strong sense of working class community and collectivism, and politically the 19th century really was a hive of activity. By the working class, what Gwyn Alf refers to in his book A Gwerin, from Chartism, Rebecca Riots, Tithe War, all of which in different ways and for various reasons presented a powerful front against the ravages of capitalism. And the journey continued through the formation of the trade unions in Aberdeen and Merthyr Tudfyl, the struggles of the miners and iron workers in both of these South Wales valleys against the wealthy coal owners and iron masters. These struggles crucially happened outside of and in spite of the political system that was in existence, which in most parts during that century excluded the working class. And as Gwyn Alf himself stated, right across the heavily populated coalfields, working people were excluded from the political nation, with only one man in 57 having the vote in the 63,000 strong constituency of Merthyr back in 1867. So the majority of the population were, as you know, were disenfranchised. At the end of that century, we saw the Great Coal Strike of 1898, which was a seminal moment for the industrial and political organisation of the working class in South Wales, and ultimately for Britain as a whole. It resulted in a reappraisal and reorganisation of the miners' trade unions. And at the beginning of the 20th century, we saw the fruits of the working class struggle become a political reality, with reference to the election of Ceir Hardy as the Member of Parliament for what was then known as Merthyr and Cynon constituency in 1900. Hardy had that vision of a socialist society, and in his words, it gives the promise of freedom, recognising that capitalism was the creed of the dying present, while socialism throbs with the life of the days that are to be. And he recognised that to achieve this, we needed unity of the working class. And in spite of geographical or historical differences, there is more in common between members of the working class in our history, our culture, our commitment to trade unionism and to our working class roots. Much more in common than divides us. The working class in Wales, as well as the rest of the UK, we share common struggles with others in this country, in the nations of the United Kingdom, but also in the Basque, the Spanish working class, the working class of Palestine, South Africa and Brazil. The history of the working class struggle is international. And as I said in my introductory words, I am a very strong internationalist. And that's what gives me strength, the knowledge that through unity we can and we must build a movement to change our society. And to quote Hardy, he said, "Socialism with its promise of freedom, its larger hope for humanity, its triumph for peace over war, its binding of the races of the earth into one all-embracing brotherhood must prevail." And that's as true today as it was back when Hardy spoke. And that isn't unlike the Communist Manifesto, in which Marx called for workers of the world unite. But we must understand that internationalism and national identity, in my view, complement each other. They do not contradict. I understand, as an example, the struggles of the Palestinian people for their home, their language and culture because of our history here in Wales. That sense of solidarity is strengthened when we understand our own place, identity and culture. And what's interesting for me here is you have an interrelationship between economic, political and cultural developments, all of which are strands that hang together to form the whole picture of this. And it's something that we can learn from and that we can and should appreciate today. As our history shows, society, like all of us individuals here in this room, is not one-dimensional. It's made up of a complex array of difference and diversity of place, culture, identity, politics. And for me, underpinning all of this is the class nature of our society and the importance, and it remains of critical importance to raise class consciousness. Now, another Welsh man who had that vision was Bevan, who played an instrumental role in the only UK government that we've had that fundamentally sought, it really did try to transform this country in favour of working class people. Now, he was a socialist who prioritised class struggle and identified three core changes that were required: trade union campaigns to lift wages, public ownership of industry, and the establishment of social security. Bevan also advocated a pluralist approach, with people of different political persuasions working collaboratively to achieve a common goal and the common good. And that is an approach that I also share and I'll return to later. But crucially, Bevan also saw the need for a vision. He had a clear vision for the need for wholesale transformative change. And to quote him, he said, "It's not enough to simply nationalise the health service or transform the welfare state. You need always to have a vision of the society that you want to create." And I think sometimes we lose that vision. And again, it's something that I'd be keen to explore when we speak later. So the importance, as I said, of that quote is that however much we need to clarify our thinking around particular issues, such as the relationship between the state and trade unions, or the preservation of culture, or how we manage the country's finances, the driving force, which we can never lose sight of, is the question of what society we want. What is our vision in Wales? Do we know that? Can we reach an agreement on what our collective vision is? I think we can. Our history shows us that the role of country, Cymru, Wales, has in this struggle, without a doubt, been immense. We've got to be proud of this, but we must be careful not to view our history through rose-tinted glasses, because despite all the positives, the vast wealth that was created in our country was extracted, poverty and inequality was rife, and the reins of power were held in Westminster. S.O. Davies, a true socialist, and he remains Merthyr Tudfyl's longest serving Member of Parliament, and he was very aware of Westminster's stronghold and the adverse impact this had on our country. And this is why he campaigned for greater devolution and home rule for Wales. And to quote from one of his parliamentary speeches, "Wales strongly objects to this Parliament irrevocably dragging it into the abyss of destruction. Were Wales allowed to control and govern its own affairs, it would easily be made one of the richest countries in the world, and that within a generation. Why should we Welsh people quail at the thought of separation in a wholly political sense from England? We can feel no enmity against any other people or nation, whatever their colour, creed or religion. The heart of our hospitable country goes out to those who are struggling against tyranny and against obstruction, because we know that obstruction is being placed in the way of this little country to which I am proud to belong." And this is why he proposed a Parliamentary for Wales bill in the House of Commons, which, while unsuccessful, I feel really did sow the seeds in many ways for our current Senedd. Now, I particularly picked out those references from S.O. Davies, as it really does encapsulate much of my message and my belief as a socialist here in Wales, linking the question of democracy with that of economic wealth and power to our internationalism and care for our fellow human being. We can learn so much from our history to inform our present and future, but we can't and should not seek to relive it, and that is a fundamental point for me. Now, capitalism continues to reign supreme, but we are at a different stage. And while we must, above all, hold on to the socialist vision, the means of getting there requires consideration, and agreement needs to be reached. And this is why I will accept any invitation to be able to have discussions such as this today. So we've had, in my lifetime, over 40 years of neoliberalism drummed into us. So the transformation of the kind that Gwyn Alf, Hardy, Bevan, S.O. Davies and others advocated is deemed to be no longer possible. Thatcherism saw the death knell of our industries here in South Wales, and our communities are now referred to in very unflattering and depressing terms such as post-industrial. What does that mean? It presents an image of emptiness, of hopelessness, absence of any opportunities or future. And that is not true, and that image must be challenged. We remain in a class struggle, let's make no mistake about that. And it is imperative that we have that vision for a better socialist society. And it's also still vital that we raise the class consciousness of people so that they also understand both the society in which we are currently living and the kind of society that is achievable for us. The British state is one of the most centralised and authoritarian in the Western world. Sovereign power is concentrated in the sovereignty of UK Parliament, and there is a democratic black hole with political power and control tightly held by UK Parliament and the continuation of a non-elected House of Lords and monarchy. Our current political system is archaic, with the Crown acting through Parliament is sovereign, so ministers are able to use Crown powers to circumvent parliamentary scrutiny in many areas. While we laud our democratic parliamentary system, it is increasingly clear that it is seriously flawed in practice and is not working for us. We are at a critical juncture in our country. The Tory government has and continues to ride roughshod over our existing constitutional rights, re-centralising power as with the Internal Market Act, Election Act, Policing Act, Nationality and Borders Act, which in Wales has left no option but for the Senedd to withhold legislative consent for a number of these pieces of legislation. I commend the Senedd for doing that. And the same is happening with the distribution of resources, whether we look at the Shared Prosperity Fund or the Levelling Up agenda. UK government is bypassing democratically elected, devolved governments to provide less funding to local authorities. And they pit local authority against local authority, divide and rule. And we are now experiencing the worst cost of living crisis in living memory. We have in the UK an increasing emphasis on unfettered free markets. There's a rampant wealth accumulation by the few at the expense of the many. And centralised state power paradoxically, has been essential to enable the expansion of the free market and to allow capital to dominate across the country and indeed across the globe. Britain today sees enormous political and economic imbalances, vast regional inequalities and a lack of commitment and understanding for devolution. Because economic and political power structures are interdependent, it is essential that we consider constitutional change as part of the challenge to the economic neoliberal status quo. But I'm not advocating, and I never have advocated, constitutional change for the sake of constitutional change. I am arguing for it as a stage on the journey towards establishing a radical alternative to neoliberal Britain. Constitutional change for me is not an end in itself, but an essential link in the process of changing society in and for the interests of the many. And it struck me in researching for this lecture, the Melyn Drafod, in looking at the financial position that independent Wales needs to face, has the statement in its introductory comments in the document Achieving Independent Wales, that their priority is promoting progressive independence, not independence for its own sake. So not dissimilar to my position. I truly believe the socialists need to be arguing for a fundamental reconfiguration of the British state because of the necessity to situate the constitutional debate within class-based politics. That, as well as there being obstacles, there are also many opportunities for reform that will advance the socialist policies, and that is essential to focus both on political power and economic factors, which are inextricably linked, in order to bring about essential change, for me, from a capitalist to a socialist society. And while my focus concentrates on the relationship between political and economic power, I'm also very acutely aware of the significance of other factors: identity, diversity, culture, the climate, all underpin and run through my approach to politics. They're all an integral part of our understanding of where we are now, what we want to achieve, and crucially, how we are going to achieve it. And I will return to those later. And this analysis, for me, is an accurate reflection of what Marx himself argued for. When writing about the Civil War in France, Marx wrote, and I quote, "Instead of deciding once every 3 or 6 years which member of the ruling class was to misrepresent people in Parliament, universal suffrage was to serve the people, organised in communes." Now, this statement has meaning for us today in that it speaks to us about the need to bring decision-making and the levers of power in all respects, economic, social and political, close to where people live. There are throughout the UK increasing demands and action being taken for greater devolving of political power and independence to the regions of England, the nations of Scotland, Cymru and Ireland. So there are great opportunities for change and challenge to the political system. One approach that challenges the status quo is radical federalism, and that is something that I've advocated since being elected. It seeks an equal partnership for the nations and regions of Britain and is founded on socialist principles. And it seeks not just political power, but economic power, and is underpinned by the core values of democracy, fairness, justice, climate responsibility, and equality. And the proposals include, I'm only just picking out 4 or 5 of the key aims of radical federalism. Firstly, the UK would become a voluntary union of nations and regions within the UK state, performing only those strategic tasks which could not be performed at a more local level. Secondly, guarantee minimum and common standards in key areas, allowing the constituent nations to set their own levels above that minimum. Local authorities would be given parity of esteem and partnership with central and devolved legislators, and a commitment to a fair and a needs-based share of resources and prosperity across the whole of the UK. And the thinking behind this approach, in my view, is about creating independent power bases across the UK at local, national and regional levels that can challenge the current capitalist chokehold from the bottom up. And here in Wales, there are some examples of attempts to put this into practice. I think the cooperation agreement between Labour and Plaid Cymru is in itself a challenge to the political status quo. And there are attempts, albeit not always successful, to act in accordance with the vision of a fairer and more equal and diverse society. The support, for instance, for a nation of sanctuary, the climate change agenda, the climate ministry, the commitment to public energy, public construction company, the establishment of a UBI pilot. We've got a Future Generations Commissioner, social partnership agreement, and as I mentioned earlier, the refusal to give legislative consent to an array of some of the worst pieces of legislation by the UK government. And it's vital that we engage our principles on a micro level, but also on a meso and a macro level. So for me, it's about the local, the regional, the national, and the international. And taking action locally with local people and their representatives in the voluntary sector, trade unions, community groups is critical, in particular to enable us to reach a clear understanding of what society we all want and what our vision is for the future. Like I said earlier, it's a process of raising class consciousness, and that can only be done by engaging with people on the basis of their needs, interests and aspirations. And this is why, since I've been elected, I have been committed to work not on behalf of people, but to work alongside the people in Cynnal Valley and beyond. And some examples, I'll just give a handful of examples. I stood out and made a public statement in support of free school meals in Wales before it was passed by the Senedd. I support the Right to Food campaign and do a lot of work with local food banks and pantries. I voted against Tory attacks on workers' rights and standing alongside trade unions on local picket lines. And I have on a number of occasions, and it's not something I'm proud of, and it's not something that I've ever taken lightly, I have broken the whip of my own party on occasion, where I feel that I've had to, on the basis of my consciousness, but that is not an easy decision ever to make. I've been very clear since being elected that I'm there to represent the interests of the people of Cynnal Valley, not for my own interest. Being a politician is not an entitlement, which is something I wish more of us understood. It is a privilege, and you've been elected to that position, and you're there, like I said, to represent people. We've done a lot of work against the cost of living crisis. We've done local surveys, presented a petition to Parliament, held local rallies, and I've spoken about this many an occasion, both in Wales and in Westminster. We've held in Cynnal a series of climate assemblies calling for a world that is fit for future generations, with investment in green energy, training our young people to give them the skills for the future. And we also do a lot of work around calling for public ownership of all utilities, ending and reversing the privatisation of our public services. But I've reached what I think is now a crucial stage on my journey. Pulling all these strands together alongside the local groups and agencies, including trade unions, statutory agencies, local people, we are now working to establish what is referred to as a community wealth building approach. And that, we feel, is the way forward for our community. As I touched on earlier, our history shows us how wealth is created in these communities and how historically it has been extracted from here. We can't and we must not allow that to happen ever again. We have got to find ways to develop, create and fundamentally retain wealth within our communities throughout Wales, but also beyond, internationally for me, for the benefit of all. And this is where, for me, we learn from our history, but we make sure we do not repeat it. And drawing on the work of Raymond Williams, who said, and again I'll quote Raymond, "Radical and communal Wales will be real to the extent that it develops in plan and practice new forms of cooperative work and communal socialism, new kinds of educational and cultural collectives." And that's why I commissioned the Bevan Foundation to undertake independent research on the how of achieving a different approach at a local community level. And I'm not alone in this endeavour, as many of you will know. only yesterday and Thursday, we hosted in Cynan friends from Blaenau Ffestiniog to share ideas and experiences. And in a couple of weeks, I'm going to be visiting friends in West Wales, Planed, Chris Thomas and others, to see what we can learn from what they are doing there. But what's important here is that we all understand the need for a bottom-up approach to changing society. But that's got to be in line with a bigger vision and campaign for a fair, equal and just society. And our friends in Blaenau, and I'm going to mention Sel Williams, have coined the phrase cymunedoli, communityisation, to describe this movement, which I think is very apt. And I am truly excited to be involved in this and the potential that it's got to bring about change from the bottom up. Now, it isn't an either-or situation for me. We can't wait for change at a macro level when our neighbours and friends can't eat or heat their homes. We've got more food banks than McDonald's. 11 million people in the United Kingdom are using food bank. It is a travesty on us as a nation that we're in this situation. People can't afford to dress their children, buy beds. That was in the news yesterday. People don't have safe, comfortable homes, don't have work, or where they are working, it's insecure, it's 0 hours, it's short term, it's on low pay, where they remain serious threats to our Welsh culture and language. And most pressing of all for me, and I think for all of us, is the existential climate emergency. And unless we take action on that, I truly do think that the future of our planet is at risk. We can't wait, and we need action now. And we're not alone in Wales in thinking along these lines. And the advantages, and they're not all advantages, which I will come on to, of a federalist approach, in my view, is that we bring together the commonalities among the working class communities throughout the UK and even beyond. So some examples, there's brilliant work being undertaken in the north of England by Metro Mays, Andy Burnham in Manchester, Jamie Driscoll in Newcastle, Preston you would have heard on, hotbed of work on versions of community wealth building. The drawback though with this, because there are always drawbacks, is that we still depend on UK government and the powers in Westminster being prepared to let go of some of their powers and to change fundamentally, to change the way society is run. Will this happen? Is an independent Wales the only credible alternative? And I am at the question and listening stage on this. And I would say independence is and has to be on the table. And this is in line with the work of the Constitutional Commission in Wales, which is reporting at the end of this year. And the interim report came up with 3 options. I think it was entrenched devolution, federalist structure, or independence. And I hope that the final report will help clarify my own position and the best way forward for Wales. But my judgment will also be governed by which I feel best delivers, for me, is about the working class and for the working class. And in the meantime, I'm going to continue being active, involving people in my community in community wealth building activities, but also on a national level campaigning for structural change from a capitalist to a socialist society, which we so desperately need. And ultimately, and I'm sure you'd all agree, it's for the people of Wales to decide what future we want, not for politicians like me. And And that means work for those of us who are committed to whatever extent and in whichever way to the need for change. Because people's understanding, their consciousness of the issues, really, it does need to be raised. And this presents us with further challenges, because we know that people will buy into the ideas of the ruling class and the ideas that the ruling class want them to buy into. And use a quote from Karl Marx, which I think summarises it very well. The ideas of the ruling class are in every epoch the ruling ideas. The class, which is the ruling material force of society, is at the same time its ruling intellectual force. The class, which is the means of material production at its disposal, has control at the same time over the means of mental production. And other thinkers have expressed very similar positions since the time of Marx, from Gramsci to Chomsky's view that the ruling class is very good at keeping people passive, giving them the sense that they are free to think as they like, but the system would put limits on that debate. And the media in particular, has a lot to answer for its power is insidious but blatant at times. And I think a classic example of this is some of the public outcry, bringing it to the present day and fight back against the introduction of the 20 mile per hour speed limit in Wales. Another would be public attitudes towards people seeking asylum, and we're going to be facing arguments against the proposed increase in Senedd members. So we have got to counter those positions, all of us, whatever our differences on some political issues. We're not a racist society here in Wales. We want to welcome refugees. We want clean air, safe roads. We want greater powers for the government on Wales. But we don't defend those ambitions and policies by hiding and keeping our heads down. We have got to get out there and campaign for those policies. While there are opportunities for reform, we've also got to be honest about the obstacles. From the evident lack of political engagement, at the last Senedd elections, only 40% of people voted in Cynon Valley. So 60% of people in Cynon Valley did not vote. Why? I mean, there is a serious issue there that we have to address. Also, the absence of campaigning practice by parties of all political persuasions, including my own, outside of election times, to a failure to undertake meaningful and proper consultation and involvement of people in decision making. The majority of people do not feel that they can influence decisions, be it political or economic. It is about the understanding of alienation in a class society where people feel alienated from their work, from the products they produce, from each other, and from the institutions of the state, where the ruling ideas are the ideas of the ruling class. So this is my message to all politicians today, and everyone in this room, quite frankly. Democracy and involvement of people doesn't stop at the doors of the House of Commons, or the Senedd, or the Council chamber. Democracy isn't about voting every few years for people to sit in Westminster or Cardiff to represent you, or far too often to misrepresent you. And I call Westminster the bubble because that is what it is. It needs to change to reflect and protect the diversity and depths of interests that many, and not the few, within our society hold. And for me, the Senedd too must take on board the increasing need to engage with the electorate, to ensure that Senedd members are embedded in their communities, to explain the policies in an inclusive and active way, and to campaign openly and vigorously for the changes it proposes, alongside and with people throughout our country, and not on behalf or for them. And that's one of the reasons given for the need to increase the numbers in the Senedd. And it's clear that the facts of the case for this development need to be communicated effectively to the Welsh people in the face of right-wing disinformation and spin that is currently being propagated. Now, I'm not saying, and I am coming to my conclusion, you'll probably be glad to know, I'm not saying that I'm on the end of my journey. None of us are. Or at a conclusion for all these issues. No journey is ever straightforward, as I'm sure Gwyn Alf would have appreciated. It's got twists, it's got turns, it's got ups, and it's got many, many downs. It's got diversions or changes of directions. And I think people travelling from Cynnal to Merthyr or vice versa at this moment know that better than most, which is why I was almost late today. But seriously, if we are not prepared to change, to allow our thinking to grow and develop, we really do become part of the problem. Yet there are always some priorities, some principles that will underpin what we do as we travel through our political thinking. And I do hope that I've made my priorities clear and my vision clear this afternoon. We have the power to shape our future. We in the valleys of South Wales can, and I believe will, be at the forefront of change as we've been in the past. We'll walk in unity and strength along it to build a future where our young people benefit from our successes in what is, without a doubt, as I've said, a class struggle. As socialists have understood over so many years, theory and practice go hand in hand, and turning our theoretical understanding into action must be our way forward. We do seriously need clear red action to give future generations across Wales and further afield a greener, fairer, socialist future. And we've got to continue building our movement. We need to stop tribal politics and bring to end what currently exists in many ways, a tribal political system. We've got to reach out across parties and engage with a diverse range of political, civic and progressive organisation to develop a new reform agenda for a future radical, diverse and democratic UK. This is not insurmountable. We can do it. We've got to get out campaigning in an inclusive way, involving people and community in a way that makes them genuinely feel that they do have a voice and that they do have a vital part to play in making the change happen, giving people a sense of ownership and a voice and control over the wealth that they create and of the community in which they live. We've got to start doing that. By taking action, by involving themselves in campaigns, they can and we can come to realise that we've got nothing to lose. And in the words of Marx again, we do have a world to win. And how are we going to measure our success? By our level of fiscal responsibility, by the health and well-being of people, by the abolition of poverty, redistribution of this obscene wealth that is held in the hands of so few, by the improved education of our children and young people, or by the effects of our investment in green energy to combat climate change. I firmly believe, as did Gwyn Alf, Cyr Hardy, Nai Bevan, S.O. Davies, and all the thinkers I've referenced today. And I will add that there is a serious absence of female thinkers in that list, which needs to change as well. That there is another way. Another way is possible. It does mean us uniting and agreeing a central core of ideas and opinions and get it out there, campaigning on issues that matter and that can improve the lives of the working class, that keeps the wealth we produce here in our communities, that gives young people that future and creates a fair and equal society. It should be easy. We can do it. Let's get out there, please. These are the challenges and there are opportunities. And as a socialist, I feel I've got a duty to act, and I think I've acted as much as I can within the constraints that have been placed upon me. And I want to finish on a positive note, because I am an optimist, rwy'n llawn gobaith, and I am and continue to be filled with hope. If we believe a better future is possible, if we have that optimism, that hope, it is incumbent on us, as I've said, to take action. And it is becoming increasingly clear to me that there is a disconnection between conventional politics, the existing political and constitutional system, and the people of this country. This is the case throughout the UK and is and should be a serious cause for concern for anybody involved in politics. It cannot continue to be business as usual. And I'm also increasingly positive about the interest and commitment of people to the political concerns and issues of the day. From the Right to Food campaign, the Enough is Enough campaign, there were close to 2 million people who signed up to the Enough is Enough campaign at a UK level, but also to the independence debates and movements here in Wales, seeing 10,000 people walking in Bangor, there were 10,000 people here in Merthyr. You were obviously hitting a note and are resonating with people, and we need to explore that together. We need to work to see what is resonating and why the traditional party political system and parties is not resonating with people. And also greater regional autonomy in England and the move towards a united Ireland. Black Lives Matter movement has been transformative, and we had hundreds of people over in Cynon Valley a couple of years ago marching on that particular issue. And by no means last, the climate change movement. These can and do attract thousands of people, many of them younger people, most of them people who are not involved in the traditional political party system. And many, if not most, are disengaged from conventional processes. So there is an appetite, a definite appetite for change, and that really does give me, and I hope you, cause for optimism. So please join me on this journey, which while we learn from our history, we use our understanding to take action, to step forward, to build a fairer, greener future for the people of Wales, keeping that red flag of socialism flying here. I have that hope. I have that hope, gobaith ac undod, optimisms, but it is not going to happen unless we all work together. Diolch yn fawr.